أحمده وأصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه آمين يا رب. Before I begin, I want to give an introduction to this book that I'll be reading from, because as I read from this book, people will think that I'm reading conspiracy theories. I'm not reading from conspiracy theories. This is a professor from Rutgers University. He has a book called Great Political Theories. I'll be reading from there, because when you read the things that some of these philosophers say, you can only wonder how evil and how crooked and how cruel human thinking can get. There is a philosopher named Spencer, who is the prophet of a philosophy called social Darwinism. Anybody here heard of social Darwinism before? Yes? Good. We're going to actually read his own words today. And you may say, like, how can people like this exist? But this is what Spencer says in his own writings, in his own words. It's not conspiracy, not exaggerations. It's the man himself, and then we will talk about how his ideas have manifested in modern times. Meaning, this is writing of the early 19th century. We'll see how these writings are manifesting themselves even today. So this guy, Spencer, he writes, "For if the unworthy are helped to increase by shielding them from that mortality which their unworthiness would naturally entail, the effect is to produce generation after generation a greater unworthiness. From diminished use of self-conserving faculties already deficient, there must be result in posterity still smaller amounts of self-conserving faculties. The general law which we traced above in its bodily applications may be traced here in its mental applications. Removal of certain difficulties and dangers which have been met by intelligence and activity is followed by a decreased ability to meet difficulties and dangers." What is he saying? For if the unworthy are helped, meaning who? The weak of society. Why should we help them? If the weak people are weak, let them be weak and let them die out. He's saying that in the animal world, what happens? If somebody is weak, another animal will come and eat it. Why not let that be in the human world? Why should we help the poor? There's no need to help the poor. In fact, there's a book called The Protestant Ethics, which is a famous book written about 200 years ago, which compared Europe with America. And one of the main themes of this is that the reason America is prosperous because in a lot of American pragmatic thinking is if you're poor, it's because you deserve it. And if you're rich and you're well-to-do, it's because God favors you. It's because what? God favors you. This is the Protestant ethics that says this, that if God likes you, He will shower favors upon you. If God doesn't like you, He will not shower His favors upon you. And why would you be so mentally deranged as to spend your energies helping the poor people? Those people that are weak, just as what happens in the animal world, the weak die out, let the weak die out. So on the one hand, you have a political elite who is bought into this idea, who's bought into the idea that why should we spend time helping the weak of society. You know, one of the very famous philanthropists, you know what a philanthropist is? Somebody who likes to give money, who believed in the ideas of Spencer, was Carnegie. Anybody heard of the name? Where did he spend his money? Spent a lot of money. He's known for his spending of money, but for what? For museums. To make the people that are the best of the best, give them a better culture, give them a higher society, give them higher culture, make museums, make art, buy art and invest in art and culture and music to make the people that are already of a certain stature within society to go higher. But don't spend your time with the poor. The point is, why not let the miserable out of their misery? Why not let the miserable what? Out of their misery. They have a life of suffering. Why continue their suffer? It is with this type of mentality that you can justify all sorts of things. When we're talking about politics in the Qur'an, I'm not talking about the structure of the Islamic State. I'm talking about human behavior. How human beings in the elite and the relationship of the elite with the followers, how that functions, how certain groups, how certain people within the elite think. What are the philosophies that are very attractive to them? So Spencer came with this idea that those that are going to survive, those that are going to thrive, they're good, and those that are weak, cut them off. Just like a surgery. If you have a cancer and there's some disease in the feet and you need surgery, cut the feet is better than letting the cancer spread. If they're miserable people, cut them off. If they die from starvation, let them die from starvation. It's better for them. At least they won't have to have misery generation after generation. Now what I'm saying may sound like, oh, is this really real? Let's see how real this is. One of the first manifestations of this in this century, in the last century, the 19th century, 19th, 20th century, before World War I, and actually World War I until World War II, was a field called eugenics. Anybody ever study eugenics? It was a field in which people wanted to, like Hitler, people like Hitler and others like him, there was laws passed in the United States that if you're a criminal, you cannot have children. You know that? Laws passed in different countries that if you're a criminal, you can't have children because your progeny will be as miserable as you are, and we can't have that. We need a progeny of successful people. Hitler wanted to create like a Superman race. He wanted his people only to have kids from the best of his people to produce like a superhuman race. And let the people that are having misery, let them die out. In fact, we'll remove them from their misery. It's better, as far as Spencer saw it, it's better to remove their misery and let the collective be healthy. And so he also writes, there's so much bakwas here that it's, anyway. We should think it a very foolishly sort of benevolence. It's, benevolence, to take care of someone. It's a very foolish sort of benevolence which led a surgeon to let his patient's disease progress to a fatal issue, rather than inflict pain by an operation. Similarly, we must call those philanthropists who spend their money for the poor, who prevent the misery from ending, would entail greater misery upon future generations. Even today, you have people talking on the same terms. When the whole financial crisis happened, there was a conversation, should the government bail the people out? Should the government not bail the people out? And a lot of the people were like, it's Darwinian economics. Let the poor people who have foreclosures, don't help them. They deserve that. And this wasn't said in one place, this was said throughout. It's the attitude towards the poor in society. It's the attitude of how the elite looks at itself. That if you were like us, you would be like us. But since you're in a miserable state, you deserve to be in a miserable state. What is the mindset and the workings, and how do the elite think in relationship to the public? This is the essence of the argument, that what he is saying, he's saying I'm right because this is the natural order of things. The weak get destroyed. The weak animals, the smaller fish, will get eaten up. It's okay if it happens. Let the best civilization survive. And so if there is a clash of civilization, it's okay. Let's just do away with their misery. When Madam Albright, the one who was the Secretary of State for Bill Clinton, when she was asked that, do you think it was worth it for 1 million kids to die in Iraq with the US policies, what was her answer? Yes, absolutely. How do you think a human being justifies so easily the killing of millions of people? How do you think a human being justifies it? He justifies it because in his mind or her mind, it is for the greater good. This is one group of elitist mentality, which is the people that are not well-to-do, it's okay. You don't need to help them. The result of this mentality is the following. I'm going to read this page and then I'm going to discuss it a little bit. At the beginning of the 21st century, when the rich world is enjoying the benefits of scientific and medical research and looking forward to long, prosperous lives, it is difficult to comprehend why so much of the world's population still go hungry, which is 1 in 5. 1 in 5 in the world go what? Hungry. The statistics tell us a problem of immense proportions. 800 million go hungry every day. 2 billion people suffer from chronic malnutrition. 18 million people die each year from hunger-related diseases. 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, which lead to chronic health problems. Around half of the deaths of children under the age of 5, which is about 10 million a year, are associated with malnutrition. The death of these people does not occur because of food shortages. It's not that human beings haven't been able to produce enough food and then they die. That's not what happens. 2 things cause people to starve to death. Number 1 is the poor people who starve to death can't buy the food. And number 2, the second thing that happens is the people that starve to death, their food is exported somewhere else, given to somebody else. Somebody who can basically buy their food. And where is this food consumed? In developed countries, where there are also hungry people. How did this ever come about? That we can have a world where we have enough food, but people, 1/5 of the world is dying out, and it's okay, and people can justify it. And people that know that this is happening in their own countries and are selling that same food from that very country to other countries where their own people are dying, how do they justify it? They justify it with the attitudes and the likes of people like Spencer. Social Darwinism. They just think that if they can't survive, it's their problem. Why is it my problem? Why is it the problem of the elite? So this is one group of the elite. I want to go over this passage of the Qur'an that you've all gone through, but I want to put it in the light of the context of what I said. You know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that, when Allah says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمُ اتَّقُوا وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ أَنْفِقُوا مِمَّا رَزَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ قَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَنُطْعِمُ مَنْ لَوْ يَشَاءُ اللَّهُ. Look at the attitude. أَنُطْعِمُ, should we should feed. أَنُطْعِمُ مَنْ لَوْ يَشَاءُ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ. We should feed. We should be responsible to feed those that Allah hasn't fed. In antum illa fi dhalalin mubin. You guys are like in the clear wrong. You guys don't know what you're talking about. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His sunnah hasn't made one monolithic group. Okay? There are elite who care, but they work in another way, which I'll talk about. For example, in this country, the right wing thinks very much along the lines of what I have just described. The left wing thinks in a very different way, which we will talk about. There's many books that have come out on political psychology, the voting behavior, so on and so forth. Those people that are of the middle class, they want to always attach themselves to they want to have the things of the upper class. For example, in the Qur'an, when Fir'aun wanted to get something done, he went to the doctors of that time, you can say. The scientists of that time. He went to the magicians. What did the magicians say to Fir'aun? Will we be close to you? Inna lana ajra. Do we get any ajr? Do we get any reward for doing what you want? In kunna ghalibin, if we succeed in what you want, will we get a reward? So the middle class, those people that have some status within the society, they will always want to be as close as possible to the elite. And they will always say, do we have any ajr? Do we have any reward? You see, Fir'aun is like the politician par excellence in many ways. He thought that he will get the best of the magicians of his time, and he will bring them in the daylight for everyone to see. People don't realize this. Musa ﷺ showed the miracles of Allah twice. One was when he went to Fir'aun, and he showed him the staff and the bayda and showed him the ayat. But then Fir'aun wanted to challenge him. مَوْعِدُكُمْ يَوْمُ الزِّينَةِ وَأَنْ يَحْشُرَ النَّاسُ الضُّحَى. So they wanted to challenge Musa. So Musa said, okay, in the daylight where everyone is there, let the people gather and let them see what happens. Now the competition was between him and the magicians, right? And they had a competition, and Musa ﷺ won the competition. So now Fir'aun's sitting there, the whole public is there, he's embarrassed, right? So what does he say? He says, قَالَ آمَنْتُ لَهُ. You believe in him before I gave you permission? قَبْلَ أَنْ آذَنَ لَكُمْ. Now watch this. Now this is the politician talking. إِنَّهُ لَكَبِيرُكُمُ الَّذِي عَلَّمَكُمُ السِّحْرَ. He was the big magician who taught you all the magic. إِنَّهُ لَكَبِيرُكُمُ الَّذِي عَلَّمَكُمُ السِّحْرَ فَلَأُقَطِّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلُكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ وَلَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ فِي جُزْعِ النَّخْلِ. And then the conversation continues. They say, the magicians say, قَالُوا لَن نُؤْثِرَكَ عَلَى مَا جَاءَنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالَّذِي فَطَرَنَا فَاقْضِ مَا أَنْتَ قَادٍ إِنَّمَا تَقْضِي هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And then they say, وَمَا أَكْرَحْتَنَا عَلَيْهِ مِنَ السِّحْرِ. And the magic that you forced us to do. The magic what? You forced us to do. So when Fir'aun was asking, and they said, will you give us some reward? It was as if they had no choice, but they still wanted to get closer to the elite. They wanted to use that opportunity to get closer to the elite. Always the middle class wants to get closer to the upper class, because they're already enjoying some comforts, and they feel that they can get more comforts. Now, so one group of elite says to this group, the middle class, in Islam we don't have upper, middle, lower class. We have only those that give zakat and take zakat. That's the only distinction we have. But to understand it from their terms, the middle class, wanting to be always part of the upper class says to the middle class, let me pat your back, you're doing a good job, keep doing what you're doing. Okay? And we will use the trickle-down theory. Anybody know about the trickle-down theory? The way to grow society or make society prosperous is to invest in the businesses, invest with the elite, so that the elite will be able to create more jobs for the rest of society. Now there's a whole different group of elitists. They say this. See, they don't have the upper hand. They don't have the upper hand. The upper hand is with the people that are having a certain attitude with the lower people, because they're already enjoying the fun. So these two elitist groups are at odds with one another. Sometimes they're on top, sometimes they're on top. The second group is like Obama mania, you can say. The second group of elitists are those people that say we care about the poor. We care what? We care about the poor. And what happens? You know how the Prophet ﷺ said, look to the people that are lower you in dunya and then higher than you in terms of the deen, right? But naturally, when you are invested in dunya, you do the opposite. You naturally look up to the people that are higher in dunya, and you ignore or pretend that the lower strata doesn't exist. But then there's a whole group of another elite people. What they do is, they speak to the masses. They speak to the poor. And they say, you know what? You deserve a good health care system. Right? You deserve a good welfare system. He will give you dreams of the future. Give you dreams of the future. Something that will never come to be, actually, but just dreams of the future of, we're going to create jobs for you, we're going to give you good health care, and these people, they want big government to take care of the to the miserable people. Why? What is this called when you have big government? It's getting closer to socialism. So there is an elite group that wants to feel good about helping the poor. But the reason that they help the poor is not to help the poor only. But that's the feel-good part. But they want to help the poor to get their sympathies so that they can themselves remain part of the elite. One last thing that Spencer wrote. The state of transition, of course, will be an unhappy state. Meaning what? This transition where you are trying to remove the miserable people of society, you want to get rid of them, it will be what? A state of unhappiness. It'll be a state that you're not happy with. Misery inevitably results from the incongruity between constitution and conditions. All these evils. Over here he's saying evils are what? The miserable people of society. And by the way, in this sense, I want this to be clear. The point I'm trying to raise here is this, is that this mentality to consider the miserable people as bad is mentioned in Qur'an. And when it is mentioned in Qur'an, it's not just words. People are actually thinking like this. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Kahf, and Surah Al-Kahf is the surah of the modern times, because it has to do with the coming of Dajjal. And in that sense, it is talking very deeply towards the modern mindset. وَضْرِبْ لَهُمْ مَثَلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, give them an example. رَجُلَيْنِ, two men. جَعَلْنَا لِأَحَدِهِمَا جَنَّتَيْنِ. We made for one of them, we gave him how many gardens? 2 gardens. Not one, but 2. مِنْ أَعْنَابٍ وَخَفَفْنَاهُمَا بِالنَّخْلِ. And he had a garden of grapes, and then around the grapes were trees of dates. And between خِلَالُهُمَا نَهَرًا, and in between this was river. This is like a self-irrigation land. It's irrigating itself. He's done it. He's got it. But what happens to people that become so much favored in the materialistic sense? What happens to their mentality? And so when you're looking at the Muslim world, for example, you're looking at, let's say, the leaders of the Muslim world, whether it be Musharraf or Mubarak or whoever, you have to understand that they can't escape these human realities. And so, كان له ثمر فقال لصاحبه وهو يحاوره أنا أكثر منك مالا وعز نفرا. How dare a person say this? He says to his companion, who he considers a friend, لِصَاحِبِهِ. This is the point where people don't realize. He said to his, who? His friend. He considers this guy his friend, and he says what to him? أَنَا أَكْثَرَ مِنْكَ مَالًا. I am more than you in wealth. وَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. And I have more resources than you do. How dare a person say this to his friend? But it's so natural. It's so natural. I have more wealth than you. I'm better than you. Isn't it obvious? Isn't it obvious? أَنَا أَكْثَرَ مِنْكَ مَالًا وَعَزُّ نَفَرًا. I have more wealth than you. I feel sorry for you. And then وَدَخَلَ جَنَّتَهُ وَهُوَ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ. And he enters his garden. He was doing dhulm. He was doing like shirk. The dhulm, إِنَّ الشِّرْكَ لَظُلْمٌ عَظِيمٌ. قَالَ مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. He said, I don't think ever this garden will perish. Look at this garden. It's constructed so well. مَا أَظُنُّ أَن تَبِيدَ هَذِهِ أَبَدًا. He started to believe in the permanency of his resources and what he has. وَمَا أَظُنُّ السَّاعَةَ قَائِمَةً. And I don't think there's any day of judgment. Why should he believe in the day of judgment? What benefit does he have in believing in the day of judgment? He would have to give his wealth away to the poor people, and why should he do that when he's struggled so hard to make this Jannah, this garden? وَلَئِنْ أُرِدْتُ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي. And even if there is a day of judgment and I do go back to Allah, even if I go back to Allah, وَإِنْ أُرِدْتُ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي لَأَجِدَنَّ خَيْرًا مِنْهَا مُنْقَلَبًا. I will definitely find something better with Allah than what I have here. See, when you read this, you're thinking, okay, how can somebody think like this? How can somebody think so materialistically that he thinks that because he's endowed with favors in this life, he will be better off in the next life? And I'm telling you that this thinking is there in books. People like Spencer, in books like the Protestant Ethics. This thought is there amongst the elites of society. They actually think like this. And when they make policies with this as part of their subconscious reality. When they make policies, this is part of their reality of how they see the world around them. قَالَ لَهُ صَاحِبُهُ وَهُوَ يُحَاوِرُهُ. And his friend said to him, who was going around the garden with him, he's counter-arguing with him. He says, and these are the two things, two different worlds, right? Two different worlds, two different ways of looking at the world. And this man who was his friend, who was going around the garden, أَكَفَرْتَ بِالَّذِي خَلَقَكَ مِن تُرَابٍ. He says, do you do kufr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he continues. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroys his garden. And we know this. And this is exactly the nature of the elite. We live in a world where the elite changes its face very, very quickly. And so then you have one group of elitist people that are saying, these miserable people, if they die, it's okay. And another group of elitist people that are saying, we love you, we like you, we're going to be big government to you, we're going to take care of you, we're going to give you big promises of the future, we're going to promise you a utopian society. And they feel good about catering to the poor. Statistically, middle-class people vote Republican. Why? Because Republican Party is all about what? Small government, right? We can live on our own. We don't need government's help. What I do want to mention, and you know the words of Qur'an are haqq. When I say this, I'm not even joking. The words of Qur'an are what? Haqq. And there is a ta'wil of Qur'an that's based upon its time of revelation. Of course, the Ashabul Fil is referring to the people of the elephant that were there 50 years before the time of the Prophet ﷺ that wanted to destroy the Kaaba, right? But they have a lot of similarities with the Republican Party. What I want to say is this, is that there is one group of people that wants the miserable to just die. the weak to die, the weak to go away. They are burden upon society. The very term, white man's burden, do you know what it means? Do you know what white man's burden means? White man's burden, the term means the burden the white people have in trying to civilize the rest of the world. The burden the white man has in what? It's the burden of society, and the burden of society should be let go of. It's the better thing to do. It's better for everyone to do it. And like I said, this is not just stories, this is how people think. And so Spencer says, the state of transition where you let the miserable die, let them die. The state of transition will of course be an unhappy state. All these evils which inflict us, that is the what? The weak and the poor of society, the people of welfare, the people who need Medicare, so on and so forth. Those people, those evils of society which afflict us and seem to be uninitiated and obvious consequences of this or that removable cause are unavoidable attendants on adaptation now in progress. Meaning these people are an impediment for us to have progress. Humanity is being pressed against the inexplorable necessities of its new position, is being molded into harmony with them, and has to bear the resulting unhappiness as best as it can. We have to get rid of them, and we have to bear this with as much happiness as possible. The process must be undergone. The sufferings must be endured. No power on earth, no cunningly devised laws of statesmen, no world rectifying schemes of the humane, no communist solutions, no reforms that man ever did broach or will ever broach can diminish them one jot. Intensified they may be and are, and in preventing their intensification, the philanthropists will find ample scope for exertion. Meaning, if there are miserable and weak people in your society, let them die off. And when you look at, the world, starting with World War I, World War II, at any given time in the world, even today, 30% of the world is at war. Literally, I'll talk about this maybe some other point. But the point I was trying to make was, this mentality exists. That's all I was trying to say. The second thing is that then the second group of elite are those people who cater to what? Cater to the lower strata of society to remain as part of the elite. Now let's understand a few things about Fir'aun. Let's understand what? A few things. What is this personality called Fir'aun? This personality, when we look at the word Fir'aun, we generally think of a dictator. We generally think of a dictator. But it's not completely true. Fir'aun was a politician who had to make consensus. Who had to what? Make consensus. And once you have, and this is the problem of media and politics, once you've made consensus, you can't go back. Once you've made what? You can't go back. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, فَحَشَرَ فَنَادَى. Hashara means He gathered the people and He made a call. He made a nida. He made people respond to Him. You know harfun nida, it means He made people respond to what He was saying. He bought the consensus of the people. And once you buy the consensus of the people, you can't go back. One of the major things that happens in society, now this is a whole new subject that I need to open, which is that so much of the media has to do with creating myths. What do I mean by creating myths? In any society where you have an elite group and you have the people, you need to win the hearts of the people. And one of the famous ways, and many philosophers have talked about this, I can't go about this in detail right now, but one of the ways to create and win the hearts and the minds of the people is to create an opposition. Is to create what? An opposition. Like it may be Hitler, it may be Saddam Hussein, maybe anybody. But you have to do that. And once you win the consensus of the people, you can't go back. And now listen to this. When you do فَحَشَرَ فَنَادَى, you gather the people and you build the consensus, different people will consent for different reasons. And this is one of the problems why nothing ever seems to work out. Because the people that wanted to go to Iraq, they didn't go for one reason. Democracy doesn't work like that. Different people wanted to go to Iraq for different reasons. For example, a group of them probably wanted to go because they want to spread Christianity. A group of them wanted to go there because of the oil resources. Another group of them wanted to go because they think they're helping women somehow. Right? And another group of people, so all these people, they get a consensus, they want to go to Iraq. But they have no consensus on what they want to do once they win the battle in Iraq. Because all those little groups that made the whole break down to their little fragments. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the beginning of Surah Al-Qasas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن فرعون, indeed Fir'aun, what did he do? عَلَى فِي الْأَرْضِ, he was high, what? On earth. He was the high point of society. He was the peak of the pyramid. وَجَعَلَ أَحْلُهَا شِيعًا, and he made his people into different groups. This Republican Party and Democrat Party, or can be 10 other parties, or it all serves to balance one another out. It all serves to balance one another out. It's no different from a two-party dictatorship. Instead of a one-party dictatorship, you have a two-party dictatorship. Really, from a practical point of view, it doesn't work differently from that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلَ أَهْلُهَا شِيعًا, and He made the people into different groups. But when He did حَشَرَ فَنَادَى, when He gathered them and made a call, He combined all those different groups into one. How did He do that? How did He do that? He did that by giving each group something of what they wanted. Just like the magicians, when they went to Fir'aun and they said, will we get some ajr? Will we get some reward? If we do what you want, will we get close to you? And so, يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفًا مِّنْهُمْ, and by dividing them, He was also able to keep a group of them, what? Underground, right? Use them as slaves. Use them for His purposes. And then the ayah continues, يُذَبِّهُونَ أَبْنَاءُهُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَهُمْ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. The point I'm trying to say is that any society has different parts and different elites. Has different what? Different parts and different elites. There's no such thing as a monolithic society. Even within the elite, they don't agree upon anything. There are many different groups within the elite, and there are many different groups that those elite people have an exertion of influence on the public. Now, what I want to talk about now, what does this mean for the Muslim world? What does this mean from the perspective of our masajids? What does this mean from the perspective of Muslims in America? It means the following points. Number one, that whenever you see conflict based upon the fact that Muslims are divided, you better think Fir'aun. You better think Fir'aun. When you see Muslims are divided and they have different interests, you better be sure that there's somebody on top of all of this who's benefiting from both sides. First thing. Second thing, this is what happens. You see, you have different countries, and each country has its elite. Each country has its elite. And there are three types of elite groups. Now listen to this. One is the financial elite. Who was the financial elite in the paradigm of Fir'aun? Haman, Qarun, Qarun, financial elite. The magicians, what were they? Cultural elite. They were like the Hollywood stars. Yeah. See, cultural elite is like Hollywood. They make the culture of society, the norms of society. You have the cultural elite, you have the financial elite, and you can even say the magicians also represent a portion of the intellectual elite. And then you have those people that are the elite who choose which magician they want to buy. They choose who will be their Qarun. They choose what? Who will be there? Who is Qarun, by the way? He was a part of Bani Israel. He was like what Malcolm X called the house slave. You know what the house slave is? There's the field slave and then the house slave. House slave is the one who loves his master. And when the field slave doesn't listen to him, he goes running to the master. Fir'aun has to create house slaves under him so that each one of these groups can be catered to. You see, just like with Obama, the Obama phenomenon is catering to a lot of groups that were not catered to ever before. The blacks, they feel very much catered with Obama. You have never seen so many black Americans ever say before that, oh, you know, the system really works. The system really works. And a big portion of the Muslim world feels very happy about it. Obama is catering to the Muslims. Huh?
Speech only.
Oh yeah, his speech, and I mean, you know, he quoted the Qur'an. I mean, God, you know. Which president of America would ever like to quote the Qur'an? But we have to be very careful when we see things like this from a political perspective. And we have to be politically smarter than seeing just the surface of things. Like in the case of Obama, I will mention the next day, do you know where he went? He went to the concentration camps where Jews were killed and gave a speech there. And I suggest you listen to that speech. I wanted to know, you know, okay, the Muslim world really liked his speech, but how was it received in Israel? His speech, because he's a politician, he has to keep everybody happy. So it's important to know what Israeli newspapers are going to say about Obama's speech in Egypt. Yeah, a lot of people weren't happy, but a lot of people were okay. But to further be sensitive to the Jewish population, which is okay to do, because that's what you can expect from a politician. He went to Germany and gave a 10-minute speech, very somber, no diplomats around, hardly anybody probably knew about it, but the newspapers of Israel read, Obama gets us. Obama understands us. And so that's what a politician does. A politician has to make everyone feel like, I understand you. I understand your concerns. The people on welfare feel that Obama understands them. And now the Muslim people feel that Obama understands them. And the Jewish people also feel like Obama understands them. So Fir'aun has to have Qarun under, Has to have Qarun under him. And if he doesn't have Qarun under him, he's going to create a distance between himself and the public. What happens in Muslim countries, our politicians are really not very smart. And so they, like the housemaster, this is what happens. This is not me saying this is what sociologists say. When somebody from a colonized world is told that this and this and this should be your policy, and they apply that policy, the reaction that happens in the public is usually negative. Like, for example, in Pakistan, so many things happened, the public didn't want it, but the government did it. Right? What happens as a result of that? It further alienates the public from the leader. And the leader only becomes more convinced that his master is right and the public is foolish. he becomes more alienated and he becomes more convinced that my master is right. The people that are giving me policies are the ones that are right. The public is just a miserable bunch of people, and if they just died, it would be better for them. Just like Spencer said. So there is the elite at the global level, there's elite at the national level. And the elites at the national level are given money and debts from the people that are the elite at the global level. And you don't bite the hand that feeds you. It's very simple, very basic. And Fir'aun was like the global elite. Qarun and Haman were like the elite of the particular groups that they were catering to. And so it's not surprising. And this is not just, it's not just a matter of, okay, so let me make everything come together like this, since I have a few minutes left. So one group we talked a lot about, the group that is saying these people are miserable, just if they get killed or destroyed or whatever happens to them, that's fine. The socialist group, the left wing says, we love the poor. We want to help the poor. We want bigger government. We want what? Bigger government. And this is the vicious cycle that's created. You cater to the middle class with one group of elite. You cater to the lower class with another group of elite. In the end, who is benefiting? The elites amongst themselves, one time it's this party, one time it's this party. Elite is the one that's benefiting. And the people that are in the middle, and the people that are in the lower strata, they don't benefit anything. Because it was just words. It was just ideas. Now, another political reality is this. The elite is always a minority. Spencer talks about this. Many political scientists have talked about, always in the world, the elite will always be what? A minority. What does that mean? And how is it, this is the important question, how is it that the elite, being a minority, is always able to control the majority? And this is going to tell you something about America. Why is it, listen to what I'm saying, why is it that the Jewish people have such a strong influence in America? It's very common sense. Listen to what I'm saying. Minority is always the elite. Why is it that Jewish people have such an influence? Listen to what I'm saying. The majority doesn't feel they need to organize themselves. Why? Why does the majority, it's the minorities feel that they have to organize themselves? The gay and lesbian movement, the women's movement, the Muslim movement, the Jewish movement, all sorts of minority groups become the lobbyists. And they're the ones who organize themselves and have an influence on the minority elite. Why? Whereas the majority is not catered for. Because the elite is a minority group. And if a minority group, so they're on top, but then there's a minority group around the public. They're in different groups of minorities. This small group of people that's organized, what is it? It's organized. I mean, for the if you want, the one way to say it is like Jewish people have such a profound effect upon America. The other way to say the same thing is that America is so disorganized. America is so alienated from its own self, the majority is so disconnected, that a small group of Jewish people have such a profound effect upon the elite in America. It's a different way of saying the same thing. If Muslims became organized, and if they felt that there's a need, because remember, from World War I, when Jewish people came here, they felt a very strong need to get organized, because they felt if they don't get organized, they'll be wiped out. That sense of urgency was in the Jewish people. And so they organized themselves and took every opportunity to do everything that they could from a political standpoint of view. And even though they were so small in number, but they were somewhat organized and had common goals. As a community, they had what? common goals, but because the elite is itself a minority, a group of people that are what? Themselves in a minority. And a minority group always feels threatened. A minority group always what? Feels threatened. And therefore a minority group always organizes. And in there is the relationship between the upper elite and the organizing of the Jewish people, having an influence upon the elite and finding their way into the elite. And finding their way what? Into the elite. Now, majority of the Jewish people in the world, 90% of them are very poor. They're not part of the elite. Now, see, Fir'aun, as strong as he was, he said, "Ana rabbukum al-a'la," right? I'm the Lord of you all. I'm the highest Lord. Who else is there? As strong as Fir'aun claimed to be, as an elitist within society. Or he said, "Ma alimtu min ilahin ghayri." I don't know of any God, I don't know of any divine other than I don't know anybody else. But he still needed the help of Qarun. He still needed the help of Haman. He still needed the help of his armies. He still had his weaknesses. He still had what? His weaknesses. And have you ever asked yourself this question? When Musa ﷺ left Egypt, do you know why he left Egypt? He left Egypt because he had killed someone amongst the Fir'aun's tribe. And he was fearing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did make dua for this, that if I return back, they will do what? He left because he thought they're going to execute him. And so when he went back, why was it that Fir'aun didn't execute him? It's the perfect excuse. Musa, you're going to get handcuffed right now and we're going to put you on the execution. Why didn't Fir'aun attempt to kill Musa? As strong as Fir'aun was, he's the absolute, in the Islamic theology, he's the archetype of tyranny and power and arrogance, isn't he? And here comes a man who is basically not very powerful, Musa ﷺ and his brother, and he's standing in front of Fir'aun and telling Fir'aun, believe in Allah and such and such and such and such, and Fir'aun is not taking the opportunity to destroy him. Why? Why wouldn't he do that? Because even if you're Fir'aunic, even if you're as strong as you want to be, the problem that Fir'aun had was this. With Musa was Harun, and Harun was well connected with Bani Israel. Harun was well connected with Bani Israel. And killing Musa, right? And hurting Harun, even though Fir'aun persecuted many people, but at that moment, he didn't persecute Musa because he didn't have the courage to do it, because he didn't know what the tribes that are under him, the Bani Israel, what they would do in retaliation. He had to calculate it. See, when Musa ﷺ, he first did dua. رَبَّنَا إِنَّنَا نَخَافُ أَن يَفْرُطَ عَلَيْنَا أَوْ أَن يَطْغَى. Oh my Lord, I fear you that they will do tyranny against me. Right? So Musa had this fear while he was a prophet of Allah that this could happen to him. Right? It was a real concern, a practical concern he had. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قَالَ لَا تَخَافَ إِنَّنِي مَعَكُمَا أَسْمَعُ وَأَرَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Musa, don't worry. I'm with you, I'm listening and I'm looking. And then فَأْتِيَاهُ فَقُولَ إِنَّ رَسُولَ رَبِّكَ. And then they went to Fir'aun, they said, we're the Rasuls of Allah, right? إِنَّ رَسُولَ رَبِّكَ فَأَرْسِلْ مَعْنَا بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ وَلَا تُعَذِّبْهُمْ. And you just send all of Bani Israel with me, don't punish them. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never allow Fir'aun to kill Musa. But the attempt to kill a Rasul of Allah is possible. Whether it happens or not, that's not possible. Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَأَغْلَبَنَّ أَنَا وَرُسُلِي. Me and my Rasul have to be supreme. This is a law of Allah. But they did try to kill the Prophet ﷺ, right? Okay? So the attempt to try to kill Musa with an excuse that they already had, that Musa ﷺ was already fearing, that when I go in front of Fir'aun, what will they do to me? Right? So one of the reasons, I'm not saying this is the only reason. Of course there is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may have had other reasons. But one of the reasons is that Musa had a tribal backing. He had the entire Bani Israel, which was larger in population than the people of Fir'aun. And my point is simply this. As strong as Fir'aun was, as strong as he was, he had his weaknesses. No elite group in the world is without feeling its own weaknesses. There is no group of people that is more often changed in society. The elites change faster than anything else. No elite group in the world does not feel its weaknesses. Because every elite knows about all the other elites that surround it, and all the threats that it has. And one thing about in any elite group that you'll find in sociology is elite groups are always changing faces. Always changing. No one remains part of the elite forever. No one remains part of the elite forever. No one does. In fact, the great muhaddis Jalaluddin Suyuti, in the ayah of Surah Rahman, يَسْأَلُهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Everything in the heavens and the earth asks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in every moment He's in a new state of glory. The tafsir he gave of this ayah was this point, that no one remains on top forever. Everyone has to come down. Every elite has to come down. Every president has to come down. Every president who once was very well connected will come down and lose those connections. Every elite will come down at some point. And so this is why I'm saying elite people always feel very, what? Threatened. And this is particularly true in the Muslim world. Because when they see that America hung and executed Saddam Hussein, they're thinking, am I next? Are we next? Is my neck the next neck? If they got rid of Bhutto, they got rid of Faisal, you think people don't realize this? You don't think the leadership of the Muslim world doesn't realize this? They realize this. And they realize that their seats are very fragile. The Muslim world knows that's why they don't have courage. That's one of the major reasons why they don't have courage. They would actually secure their seat if they had courage. If they actually had the public with them, they would have the courage. But they have a very fragile seat given by people who think of them as dispensable, right? And they don't also have the support of the public. And so they're lost in the middle, somewhere in the middle. A political scientist named Moss-Ka, he says this: mankind is divided into social groups, each of which is set apart from other groups by beliefs, sentiments, habits, interests that are particular to it. The individuals who belong to one such group are held together by a consciousness of common brotherhood and held apart by other groups by positions and tendencies that are more or less antagonistic and mutually repellent. And as we have already indicated, the political formula must be based upon the special beliefs and the strongest sentiments of the social group in which it is current, or at least upon the beliefs and the sentiments of the particular portion of that group which holds political preeminence. And then he continues and he says, the biggest problem that elitists have is the speed in which they transition. The biggest problem elitists have is at the speed at which what? Because you got more than one elite group going against another elite group. Tawheed can only be of Allah's. Tawheed can only be of Allah's. Amongst human beings, we're just divided into different groups, whether it is the elite or any other class, and we're all bickering with one another. There's no such thing as, and that's the thing that Muslims sometimes, when we even look at the Jewish world, we think all the Jewish people are what? one entity. It's not. It's not true. Jewish people are not one entity. And within the Jewish people, what is it that we're against? We're not against Jewish people per se. We're against Zionism. We're against what? Zionism. We're against the Zionist policies. And you have to make that distinction. And so, I'll end over here, but I wanted you to know this, and this is the question that I'll end with. How evil can man be? Carl Jung, who was a psychologist, said, it's very interesting, animals, like a horse, is basically all horse, same type. But when you look at human beings, you have such good human beings who will say, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. Indeed, we feed you only for the sake of Allah. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شَكُورًا. We don't want any gratitude from you, any reward from you. And on the other hand, you have human beings who are saying, what? Why should we give? أَنُطْعِمُ مَنْ لَوْ يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ أَطْعَمَهُ. Should we feed those miserable people Allah didn't want to feed? And that's how a large portion of the elitists justify the further misery that they cause upon the world. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمين.